Chapter 4. I turned around and watched him walk out of the diner, my heart in my throat and butterflies in my stomach. I wasn't sure if I was going to get sick. I got up and rushed out of the diner, standing there looking around, but he was gone. This wasn't going to go well with the elders. Twice now this man had disappeared from me. Might as well start my nightly hunt, I thought as I zipped up my jacket. I pulled my hat down lower on my head, my hands went into my pockets, putting my head down, but my eyes were ever searching for any clue. Only thing I didn't like about this job was the dark alleyways that I had to navigate. There were a lot of unsavory people that lingered around. Most people say that monsters are a made-up thing, but they don't like to admit that some people are the monsters. From time to time, I have come across regular people that I had to get away from while I was hunting actual monsters that roam the night. They were the ones that people should be scared of, but they don't want to acknowledge that there are such things as vampires, werewolves, and the like. Turning down a dark alley, I caught a whiff of a scent that was foul. Werewolves had a scent that smelled of rotting meat. In human form, you could pass them on the street and never notice. They held professional jobs, paid taxes, and bought groceries, just like everyone else, except when they turned and went hunting. They didn't turn only on a full moon. They could turn any time they wished at night. Their foul scent was from eating raw flesh. It would be on their fur, and they didn't care about hygiene when in that form. My stomach was starting to turn from the smell. I swallowed a few times, keeping my stomach from getting rid of the food that I had put in it. I couldn't put 'em in my mouth. A werewolf could smell that a mile away. I had to have a way of blending into the homeless population. As I walked along the alleyway, I spotted it, hunched over in a corner, eating. I could hear the snarl and the tearing of the flesh. I took a breath through my mouth that kept my jacket covered so not to be noticed. I kept my head down and walked right past. It stopped eating, and I glanced at it as I passed, and his eyes locked into mine. Shit, I thought. This was not going to go well. Werewolves hated eye contact. I was hoping it was too invested in its meal to notice me. I was wrong. He went to his full height, which was anywhere from 6'8" to well over 8 feet, depending on the breed and if he was a true alpha. I kept my head down and kept walking. I could hear him walking behind me. They were a truly frightening sight. They were not beautiful like real wolves. These were monsters. Long, sharp, clawed hands. Their snouts were full of razor-sharp teeth. Muscular bodies, and they had the strength that was unmatched. Only one that could defeat a werewolf in this form was a vampire, but not just any vampire. It had to be one considered to be an elder. Vampires that were over 200 years old or more were considered that status. Hunter, it growled out. So, my reputation was now being discovered amongst the werewolf community. I ever so slowly slid my blade into my palm that I had tucked away in my shirt. Silver does affect werewolves, but it won't kill them. Ripping the heart out was the only way to kill a werewolf. Silver just stunned them. Hopefully long enough to do a job that needed to be done. I took a breath and steadied my nerves. I straightened my back and turned towards the creature. He stood a good 8 feet away from me. Too close, I thought. I started to slowly back up from it. I needed a good 20 feet to watch how it comes at me, to judge it. He turned his head to the side, watching me. He must have thought I would come at him, but instead, I was backing away. He put his head up and sniffed the air, and once he lowered his head, his eyes were locked onto mine. He growled a deep, low, guttural sound. I couldn't let him bite me. That was surely a death warrant. No humans ever survive being bitten. Female werewolves were coming up short, so they tend to hunt for a young female to turn. Hearing those screams of the young women as their bodies were trying to turn wasn't something I wished on anyone. Their bones breaking, piercing through the skin as the skin wasn't changing to accommodate the changing bone structure. He stood there watching me, and then he howled. Crap, I muttered as I knew what that meant. He was calling in more werewolves. He had found a viable female, and a hunter at that. I knew if I ran, he would give chase. I had a dilemma on what to do. My mind was screaming at me to run to the organization, but I knew I couldn't outrun a werewolf. I kept walking backwards, listening to the sounds around me. Another howl answered. Thankfully, it was a good distance away. This alleyway opened up to a main street. The werewolf didn't follow me when I hit the street. Of course, there I stopped, but didn't notice that I was standing under a streetlight. I see you and know your scent, Hunter. We will come for you, it growled out. I will gut you like a fish if you try, I growled back. It smirked at me. I realized that I was giving it just what it wanted. I turned and ran down the main street, staying in the light as best as I could. After a few miles, I slowed down. Turning a corner, I saw my diner. I went inside and sat at my booth, taking off my jacket, making sure my blade was tucked away in my shirt. I took off my hat and let my hair down. One of the only features that I liked about myself was my hair. It went to my waist and was jet black. My eyes were a dark brown that in the right light held shades of gold. I ordered coffee and water along with a plate of fries. I knew I had to regroup. Having a pack of werewolves on the hunt for you was never a good thing. Chapter 5. Halfway through my fries, I felt my stomach turn into butterflies. I glanced around, and outside of my window stood the man from last night and earlier. He stood there with a warm smile on his face. I rolled my eyes, and his eyes twinkled with laughter. I went back to eating my fries. I knew with this man it was a game. Just not sure which game as of yet. You know, Danny, you ought to be careful with werewolves, he said as he sat down. I looked up at him. I sipped on my coffee while watching him. He was an extremely handsome man. I knew I had to figure him out and what kind of danger I was in with him. I remember Tom saying to get with this man, but to do nothing. I was wondering if Tom knew this man was sitting here with me now. It's not my fault that that thing wants me as his mate, I said, eating more fries. I wasn't sure what happened next. All I know is I was sitting there eating my fries. I made one small smart-ass comment. Next thing I knew, I was up against the wall in the ladies' bathroom with this man's hands on either side of my wrist, holding me up to his height. He will not have you ever. Do you understand me? You, Danny, are mine and will be mine. I will rip out every werewolf's throat if they dare to come near you, he said in a tone with ice. I nodded my head, and we were looking into each other's eyes. His eyes were the lightest blue that I had ever seen. They were almost white. Before I could respond, his lips were on mine. The kiss at first was stiff, but my body melted and our kiss deepened. He pressed his body against mine. I ever so softly moaned against his lips. I could feel how I affected him. He broke off our kiss as he looked into my eyes. You, my sweet Danny, are mine, and I protect what is mine, he said as he kissed me once more. And he let me down gently. He left the bathroom, and I stood there, not sure if I could walk after that kiss. He made my legs feel like butter, and the butterflies in my stomach were all over the place. I went to the mirror and looked at myself. My cheeks were pinkish in color as my lips were a bit swollen from the kiss. That was the first time I had ever been kissed. I couldn't help but smile. Then I remembered he was a vampire and not one I could trust so easily. But somewhere, deep in my mind, it whispered that I could trust him. I splashed water on my face and dried off. Taking a few deep breaths, I steadied my nerves. Walking out of the bathroom, there where he sat was Tom, and that bitch of a woman, Lisa. Just what I needed tonight. I just wanted to go home, but luck wouldn't let me off the hook that easy. I walked over and sat down. I motioned for another cup of coffee. Tom sat there smirking at me, while Lisa had a look like she just ate a lemon. "I see you have been busy tonight," Tom said with a slight chuckle. I just shrugged my shoulders. "Do you know how dangerous it will be out there for you now? You have the whole werewolf community wanting to mate with you. A young female that is in heat," Lisa all but screamed at me. I was doing my job. I didn't think he would notice me. They never have before, I said, looking right back at her, which was true. I had multiple kills on werewolves, and they never once noticed me while they devoured their meal. Except this time, something was different. It knew I was there. It knew I was a hunter. What game was this Lisa playing all of a sudden? "I want you to just take 2 days off for me, Danny. I need to find out what is going on," Tom asked me. I nodded my head. I knew if he was asking, I would do that for him. He never once led me astray. "Thank you. I'll call you tomorrow evening," Tom said as he stood up. Lisa got up without saying anything and walked out of the diner. "Danny, I need you to keep up your relationship with this vampire. He might be able to shine a light on some things that I am missing," Tom said as he patted my shoulder and left the diner. So, it wasn't just me that something was off in the organization. That made me feel a tiny bit better. I looked at the time. It was only 6 in the morning. The sun should be coming up soon. I didn't want to head out in the darkness just yet. I knew what was out there. But now the stakes were higher, with me on the menu with the werewolves. Chapter 6. I heard my phone going off. I reached for it, and I squinted to see what was going on. I had 6 missed calls and 2 texts. I sat up and opened the text. "Danny, I know you must be sleeping, but damn woman, this is important. Call me when you get this. Tom." I opened the second text. "Danny, if you do not answer, I will come over there with a few other hunters and break down your door. Tom." I saw that the text was sent 2 minutes ago. "Tom, I just woke up. I'm fine and in my apartment. No need to break down my door." I sent the text, but apparently that didn't matter. I heard a loud banging on my door. I got up and went to answer it. I unlocked the door and opened it. There was Tom, Steve, and Dave, 2 of the best hunters. All 3 guys stood there looking at me. Tom was shaking his head, but Steve had the biggest smile on his face, while Dave was clearing his throat. "Danny, can you please put on some clothes?" Tom said, looking at the ceiling. I looked down and back up, turned around and walked to my bedroom, not letting them see that I was completely embarrassed. I threw on a pair of sweatpants and a big baggy sweater. Walking out to the family room, I saw that Steve and Dave were sitting on the couch while Tom was making coffee. "So, what is going on?" I asked, walking into the kitchen. Tom turned and looked at me. "You are going to need coffee for this. So go sit and relax, and once the coffee is ready, we will have a chat," Tom said. I nodded and went to sit on the couch between 2 guys. I felt tiny sitting there. Steve and Dave were both very muscular and around 6'5". Once Tom brought all our coffee to us, Tom sat down on a chair he brought in from the kitchen. Never had guests over, so my furniture was sparse. Danny, with what is going on out there with the werewolves, for the next couple of days, Steve and Dave both agreed to be your bodyguards, Tom said, sipping his coffee. I looked at Steve, then at Dave. These two? But Tom, aren't they better suited out there in the streets instead? I asked. Steve chuckled and Dave patted my knee. I rolled my eyes at their actions. What? I asked, looking at both of them. Danny, you are where the action will be, Steve said. You don't realize that you have become the most sought-after prize to the werewolves, let alone you have an elder wanting you for himself, Dave said. I looked over at Tom. It's true, the streets are abuzz about a female hunter that is in heat and has the bloodline to be turned fully, Tom said, looking at me. What do you mean by bloodline, Tom? What are you not telling me? I asked as the butterfly started to move in a zigzag pattern. I took a sample of your blood to a certain lab before you started. I wanted to see what you held inside of you. I do it with all candidates that want to become hunters. And, well, yours sprung up that deep in your ancestors there was a werewolf and vampire bloodline, Tom said, looking right at me. What does that mean exactly? I asked, confused as to how this affected me. It means that you are a rare gem, my dear girl. You get bitten by either a vampire or a werewolf, you have the genes to be changed fully. You will survive the change, Tom said. I sat there not knowing what to think. On one hand, it was good that I wouldn't die, but on the other hand, it was bad, as I would become the hunted then. Who else knows about this, Tom? I asked. Lisa, he said with a sigh. Shit, was all I said. Steve and Dave nodded their heads in agreement. No one liked Lisa, and all the guys made that clear to her every chance they got. The bad part with her knowing is I was the only female hunter right now. The rest were either office staff or were let go. I guess Lisa had always wanted to become a hunter, but didn't have the skills one needs to become one. That left a bad taste in her mouth and treated every hunter with hatred. I put a hand on Steve's knee and the other one on Dave's. Guess you guys are stuck with me, huh? I said with a smirk. For the next couple of days, you are stuck with us here, in your place, Steve said. I laid my head back on the couch and groaned. All three guys laughed. What was I going to do with two huge males in my small apartment for 2 days? Well, I'm going to head out. Remember, Danny, no working for 2 nights, Tom said as he stood up. I know, I said as I followed him to the front door. Tom turned and looked at me for a moment, and then left. Chapter 7. Since you both are here for the next 2 days, we should go over some ground rules, I said, standing there crossing my arms. Steve looked at Dave and winked. Both of them got up, walked over to where I was standing. Listen, Danny, we know you can take care of yourself, but we promised Tom to look after you. And since you are housebound for the next 2 days, Dave and I will make things easy for all 3 of us. You get your bed, but we also get to share it with you one at a time. Since you only have 1 couch, we are not sleeping on the floor, Steve said. I thought about it for a moment and understood where they were coming from. Okay, deal, but we are going to need more food, I said. Get dressed and we'll go grocery shopping like a big, happy family, Dave said, going to sit on the couch. I went into the bathroom, did what I needed to do, and when I got out, Steve was watching me. He had a small smile on his face every time he looked my way. I only had a few dealings with Steve, and thankfully they were on his good side. I had heard about Steve when I first arrived. Whatever you do, do not get on Steve's bad side, Tom told me one night over a hamburger. I never did ask, but the rumors about how he could rip apart some of the monsters with his hands was enough to make sure I was always on his good side. Dave, on the other hand, had a good-natured side about him. He rarely got upset, Dave and Steve always worked together. I guess Dave was the one that kept Steve balanced. I knew they grew up in foster care. Once they hit 18, Tom recruited them for the organization. After that, the rest is history. I went and changed into my usual black jeans. I found a nice deep red sweater that hung off one shoulder. I put on my boots and made sure to put my knives inside of them. "Old habits die hard, huh?" Steve asked from the bedroom doorway. I looked up and then at the knives. I smiled as I stood up. "I guess they do. I don't feel right not having them with me," I said as I went to stand in front of the mirror. I braided my hair, which was another trait that I always did before I went to work. "You should leave your hair down. It makes you look softer," Steve said, still watching me. "True, but also easier to get pulled," I said and winked at him. He laughed, which was rare for him, but it was a warm, rich laugh. It suited Steve. We headed out to the grocery store, where I had Dave push the cart. Steve walked beside me as we picked out our items. I would glance back at Dave every now and again, and he was watching us. Dave had a look of envy that he would hide when I would turn around, but I could see his reflection on the glass whenever we would go by it. Once we were done and everything was rung up and paid for, we went back to my apartment and put everything away. After an hour of sitting around, I was getting antsy. Both of the guys were watching me. "I can't stand this. Since I'm not allowed to work, how about we go out and go dancing or something fun?" I asked. Steve pulled out his phone and began to text someone. After a minute, his phone vibed. "Tom said he sees no harm in it, but just to be careful," Steve said, standing up with a big grin on his face. "Give me a few minutes," I said and ran into my bedroom. I stood there looking in my closet and pulled out the only dress that I own. It was a dark red with black dragons on it. The dragons were small, but the way the design made it look like they were chasing each other. I put it on and found my black heels that were in the back of my closet. I even put on some thigh highs that allowed me to attach a small knife to the inside of it. I looked in the mirror and decided to take out the braid. I brushed my hair. I added a bit more makeup, more than I normally wear, and added a bit of lipstick. It was subtle, a darker mauve color. It worked with my outfit. I walked out of the bedroom and both of the guys' mouths dropped open. "Where is Danny and what did you do with her?" Dave asked with a wink. I smiled at that comment. Steve sat there checking me out. I felt small under his gaze, but also a bit sexy. I never had a guy check me out, let alone a very attractive one. Steve stood up and walked over to me. "You look beautiful, and I like your hair down," he said quietly as his hand picked up a few layers of my hair and ran it through his hand. "Thank you," I said quietly. I also wasn't used to comments. Steve wasn't one for them, so I considered myself very lucky to get one. "Let's head out and go have some fun," I said, grabbing my purse. Dave and Steve followed me out. It was going to be a fun night, I hoped. Chapter 8. We agreed on a club that had great music and it wasn't super crowded tonight. Once inside, we found a booth for us. We ordered a few drinks, and while we sat there, all three of us were scoping out the place. I realized what we were doing, and I started to laugh. Steve and Dave looked at me with a confused look on their face. "Old habits, huh?" I said and laughed. The smile that developed on Steve's face was priceless. This man needed to smile more. Steve told Dave what he said earlier to me and what we were doing. Dave then laughed and agreed. We needed to relax more. A song came on that I haven't heard in years, and it was a slower one. I was slowly swaying in my seat, singing along to the song, when a man was in front of me. He held out his hand. I looked up and didn't recognize this man. "Care to dance?" he asked. I glanced at Steve and Dave. Both nodded their head to go ahead. So I placed my hand in his and followed him to the dance floor. I made sure to be where Steve and Dave could see me. This man seemed nice. His hands were a little too much of a touching one. After the song changed, I thanked him for the dance and went back to my table. "Danny, I don't know if this was a good idea," Dave said quietly. Steve heard his tone and was instantly on alert. "Why?" I asked, sipping my drink. "Well, this place is filling up with werewolves, vampires, and humans," Dave said, scanning the area. "I doubt they'll know it's me," I said quietly. I didn't look like the hunter that they were used to seeing. No one knew what Steve and Dave looked like either. They always had half their faces covered while doing their hunting. "Just a bit longer, then we can go home," I said, looking at both of them. Steve nodded, and so did Dave. All three of us knew that together, no one stood a chance of surviving if they decided to attack us. A fast song came on, and I couldn't sit still. Steve and Dave passed up dancing with me, so I went to the dance floor and let myself be taken over by the music. Before I knew it, I was surrounded by 6 very large men. We were all dancing and laughing, enjoying the moment until one of them wrapped his arms around me and pulled me to his chest. "My sweet little hunter, how beautiful you are," he whispered into my ear. My body froze as I looked up and saw his eyes. It was the werewolf from last night. Shit, this wasn't good, but now I knew how they got their meals to follow them out of the club. I couldn't deny that it wasn't me. He knew my scent. "I'm just here to enjoy myself," I said quietly. "Then we will do just that, for I want to find you out in the world and pursue my mate," he said as he nipped my ear, but not enough to draw blood. He let go of me, and we began to dance. The other 5 males moved away just enough not to arouse suspicion, since they saw who I was with. Word had gotten around that the top 3 hunters were here, but not to be messed with. This club was neutral territory. One of the reasons why we chose this place. We wanted just to relax and not have to worry about anything or anyone. A slow song came on, and the one from last night pulled me to his body. "My sweet hunter, what a perfect mate you will make. So soft and tender. Yet you are a fighter, which means you will do well in our pack," he said as he looked into my eyes. "I'm flattered that you think so, but I have to tell you that there is another that wishes for me to join him," I said matter-of-factly. "Is that so? Who is this one that wants your hand?" he asked. "Me," I heard another male's voice say. The butterflies went nuts at hearing his voice. "My vampire," my inner voice whispered. "You, Ryan, Prince of the Vampires, want Danny the hunter?" this werewolf said and laughed. I blinked and looked at Steve and Dave. Both were fuming that they couldn't do anything right now. But I had a feeling Tom wanted to see if I could get this vampire out in the open. I didn't like that, and by the look on Steve's face, neither did he. I was being used as bait, and that pissed me off. I turned and looked up and saw Ryan looking at me. His beautiful white eyes were now black. There was no white to them. My mind was racing at the thought of his body against mine when we were in the bathroom, how his lips felt against mine. "I suggest you let her go, Daryl," Ryan said in a tone that could cut glass. Daryl let go of my waist, and Ryan pulled me close to his side. Daryl looked at me. "When you get back to work, I'll be waiting, and then I'll make sure to mark you," Daryl said, and he turned and left the club. I looked up at Ryan, who was looking down at me. His eyes had receded back to being almost white again.